Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of speaking to the best content marketing leaders across the world. I am Kishan here, streaming in from New York again today. Very excited to have Emily and Epstein on the show today. Emily is the director of content at Sigma Computing, one of the fastest growing startups back in Silicon Valley. Uh, Emily has been the head of content at Asana in her last stint, coming in from a publisher background, having worked at some of the best publishers that we all know of, like The Atlantic, New York Observer. Uh, Emily, it's a pleasure, and thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, of course. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So, Emily, we usually have a structure for these sessions. We start with knowing Emily as a person. So, I think I've asked you a lot of questions before we kind of started this. So, in and out, a New York City girl, grew up all across in the city, studied here, not too far.
Yep.
Love to know everything about how do you grow up to end up into a journalism industry, particular journalist industry, right? And then from that side of the world where you're doing with publishers and all of that to then the tech side. Love to know your story. How's it been? So I think let's start with knowing you better.
Yeah, so I think probably the most important thing is that I was an avid reader when I was growing up. I was always reading in the dark. My parents could never get me to go to bed. I just really loved storytelling, and it was how I learned all about the world. And so when I went to college and I was an English major, obviously, I also worked at all of the student newspapers, and the student newspapers were how I got to meet people. It was how I got to understand the fabric of campus society. And so when it came time to pick a career, I thought, well, if I become a journalist, then I will get to see all of the ways different people live their lives, and I will find the happiest person, and then I will do that. And so when that happened, obviously, I realized that I actually didn't want to choose what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I stayed a journalist, and I sort of chased my career through publishing after that.
Interesting. That's like most of the marketeers we meet in call themselves accidental marketeers, particularly. I think yours wasn't an accidental move for sure. It was a much more strategic decision making on saying, hey, I want to do content all my life. Did you ever tell it to your school teacher? What do you want to do in your life as maybe a writer?
I was a good student, and in every class, I was a nerd. So my teachers were always like, "You can do anything," and I was like, "But I don't know what I want to do. I haven't figured it out yet." And so that sort of like opportunity became, in some ways, a problem because I didn't have a plan. I was like, "Well, everyone told me I could do anything, so why would I choose?" But that's where journalism can really fit into it, because one day you can be with the mayor, another day you could be with the president, another day you could be with a teacher, another day you could be with a crime, like a firefighter or something like that. And so I really got to learn about the world, and get paid to do it.
That is super amazing. I think I've understood one thing being in the content business for sure. Journalists are the toughest people to convince when it comes to quality of content. Maybe I mean they're finicky about it, but that's a good part. They understand the quality of content really well. So anyone coming in from a journalist background, I've seen the best of the marketers, especially in the content side, being ex-journalists. So kudos to what you've done. But Emily, I think would also love to know more about your professional journey. Right, you started in the journalism media publisher space, basically. Eventually where you're covering stories and you're reporting. The time of publishing is super important, the currency of it is super important, right? And then you've moved into a completely tech side of the world where you're doing SQLs and MQLs and SEO and SaaS and all of these things together. How has that journey been for you like? And I mean, would love to get a sense around how was your career progression over a period of time. Like, this is majorly for the young marketeers that we have who are going to watch this, uh, on understanding, hey, I mean, when someone actually is in the journalism background, right, how do they kind of progress ahead to build in a career like you? So over to you for that.
So I'll say I was blessed to come up in journalism at a time of massive disruption. And so, well, I actually started my career as a photojournalist. And so at that time, when I was just getting started, it was unheard of for somebody to take photos and write articles. Those were entirely two different career tracks, and nobody was doing both. And so I was a pioneer because I would come back from my photo shoots and I'd be like, oh, and I interviewed this person and I got these quotes and I wrote this up, and they'd be like, this is too long for a caption. And so that was really how I managed my career. I was like, okay, I'm assigned to do this, but what if I also did this? Would that make me more competitive and keep me in the journalism industry moving forward? And we've seen how that's really paid off, because nowadays, like, you don't get a photographer and a videographer and somebody else when you go and report on a story. They're one-man bands now. And so that's really how I sort of like ascended through the ranks, from photojournalist to editor-in-chief. That's not something that most people do or even dream of doing. And so it was really always about, like, am I learning something while I'm making something, and keeping that as a priority, because I knew and I had seen people who had been lifetime journalists completely get pushed out of the market, and they were not staying competitive, and they were not learning, and they were not capitalizing on this opportunity to reinvent it.
Interesting. And then how did you land up onto the B2B tech side of the world, the SaaS side of the world?
So my goal was to become an editor-in-chief. And when I accomplished that goal, I was like, well, what can I do next? I'm not done learning. I'm not done challenging myself. And I had always been jealous of, I guess, the work-life balance of people that work in tech. Because in journalism, you could work a 16-hour day. If there's an accident or a serious news story, you could be working, 50-hour days. And so I was really drawn to the idea that, like, I could work hard and also have a life on top of things. And so I actually planned it. I planned on moving into tech. And one of the things I did was I left, a very established company at Bustle Digital Group, and I went to work for a journalism startup, because I thought if I had that startup experience in that industry, I would be able to transition into another industry, and it worked like a charm.
You can completely prove the fact you were a very good student. All your moves seemed like very planned, very strategically taken, all pros and cons analyzed really well, and then you kind of step into it. That's super good, right? Um, I'd love to get a quick also sense around how have you also seen the role of a content marketer particularly evolve in the last maybe like 5 years, especially the pre-COVID to post-COVID era, because I think a lot of dependency on content, particularly when it so okay, let me put it this way: the conviction of people of larger companies and even like upgrowing startups, particularly on organic media via content marketing, has increased multifold. And you've been into companies like Sigma, Asana, who have had great content convictions already. I mean, they're pretty evident from the kind of brands they've been able to build over a period of time. I'd love to get a sense around how you seen your role also transition across the board, and whatever you can tell us more about both of these stints. I would want to go deeper into Sigma again and what you're doing fantastically right now. You're telling me before the shoot, but these two journeys would be very interesting, because a lot of people who are watching this are marketers on the B2B SaaS side. So whatever you can.
Well, I think even just a few years ago when I started in B2B SaaS, there was a lot more specialization in content creation. So somebody would be only writing emails. Someone else would only be writing social copy. The person who wrote the landing page for an ebook would be different than the person that wrote the ebook. And so I think the transition that I've seen over the course of time is just that, like, it's good to have a superpower, but you need to also be able to write other kinds of content. Just like an editor needs to be able to edit any type of content, you've got to understand the basics of what is the action you're trying to drive from the piece of content that you're creating, and, like, are you looking at it holistically? So if you're in charge of writing an ebook, you should be thinking, like, what is the landing page going to look like? What is the social copy going to look like? What is the nurture that this is going to attach to? What's the content of the webinar that it's going to lead into? And I think content marketers have a real responsibility to understand the ecosystem within the content that they're required to create.
Interestingly, you mentioned about the measurement factor of analytics that you're doing. And again, you're in a business analytics company, you're in a data analytics company right now, right?
Yeah.
So have you also seen like the amalgamation of data and creativity together when it came to content marketing? I'm also wanting to focus more of it from the lens of, See, I just feel like content creation is not a tough job.
Mm,
Content creation that works is a tough job, basically. And a lot of people, I mean, you might write the most beautiful campaign in the world, but if that's not performing for what the outcome has to be of that campaign, I mean, it's great piece of art to look at, but it's not gonna work and you're not gonna get paid for that. I mean, and
right.
that's how I put it, right? How have you been able to kind of marry that entire left brain side to the right brain, if I would?
So that's actually something I brought with me from journalism. So one of the either good thing or bad thing of coming up in the sort of digital age of journalism is that people were always judged by the amount of page views that they generated. Whenever any digital organization I've worked at, there have been requirements for the number of page views that a different writer had to bring in. And so they were not only responsible for creating the content, but they were also responsible for the result of the content. They were business owners in a lot of ways. They were owning the function of that. And so what I do whenever I lead a content team is I make sure that the content writer actually has visibility into the performance of their content. If I'm working
Interesting.
with someone who's focused on nurtures, then I will, review the performance of every email with them. And we'd look at the click-through rate, the open rate, the scroll depth, and we would learn from that information because it's a listening format. So it's amazing that we get to create content and we actually get to know how it impacts people and what behaviors that we're generating. In the olden days when people were writing front page news stories, the only data point you could get is how many papers sold, right? Like that was the only data point you could have around was the content successful or not. Now I can see absolutely everything. I can know exactly what someone's doing, how many times they've come back to the website, if they've converted, how long it took them to convert, what the overall value of the account was, and I can connect all of that to the content. And so it's really just if you're going to create content, you have to own the impact of that content.
Interesting. You also mentioned about, so you are into the, you also own SEO as a key metric and you have owned that in a couple of places, right? In
Mm-hmm.
this case, you were also telling me about, say, at a company like a Sigma that you're doing, who's doing fantastically well right now in the upgrowth trajectory that it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
The subject matter expertise in the content is of super high importance, right?
Yes.
So now, if I were to kind of put it this way, right, whenever I've seen SEO being scaled up, except for the last few years, now that people have understood the Google norms have changed, SEO was always looked at high volume, low quality content at scale. And
Mm-hmm.
then people used to say, hey, we're also doing your thought leadership pieces, which are like subject matter expert articles. But I don't think it's no more. It's like that anymore, right?
Yeah.
Right now, it has to marry the two of them. So how do you also, in your current roles, kind of marry these, and just not in this role, but like across the board? What has your learning been to marry the SEO side of the world
Mm-hmm.
to the content side of the world together,
So
and with the subject matter expert, of course?
yeah, I mean, I think every article should be an SEO article. I think SEO is actually a tactic, it's not a content type. If you're going to create content, don't you want people to find it on search engines? Why would you prevent people from finding and discovering and enjoying your content? So there should always be an SEO dimension to everything that you're putting on your website. It should always be top of mind. When it comes to how to balance a subject matter expert and a writer and performance and all the like, Sigma is in a very unique place because our ICP is highly educated, highly technical, and so our content needs to be. And so we actually have subject matter experts create our content, and we retrofit it for SEO because you need to have a PhD to exist and be compelling in this space. And, again, something that I learned from journalism is when you're working in journalism, the content is the product. And so now that I am working in a world where the content isn't the product, but it actually is a precursor to the product, I try to make sure there's the same value proposition and same value in the content itself. And so if we have an amazing product, we're going to convince people of that because we have amazing content, right? And if we don't have great content, then they're going to think that our product is not great.
Interesting way to look at it. Okay, fun part. I'm just coming back out of your professional career. You have also had an entrepreneurial stint. Uh, I mean, let me put a general question over there, right? And in an entrepreneurial stint, right, you learn a lot more about the business and different facets to it than your regular job that you
Yes.
do, right? What I've been learning is, and if you can give instantial references of how have you been able to use those learnings when it came to there, that might be with regards to the team, that might be with regards to your managers, that might be with regards to the management of the company, that might be with regards to maybe just day-to-day process, how to deal with stress and chaos. I mean, what have been core learnings from that would be lovely to know.
Yeah, I mean, I always think, and this is actually key to my mentorship as well. I always make sure that anyone who is working with me is not only trying to accomplish the goals of the business, but is also trying to grow their career. And so when you think about it that way, where it's like I own and manage the Emily Epstein business, I'm also director of content for Sigma. I need to make sure that everything that I'm working on is furthering both the goals that I have been given and the ones that I have for myself. And I think when you have that lens, you're going to be able to have a more exciting career because you're always thinking about what can I do next? What can I do more? And like, how am I working towards those goals and accomplishing them? And I think when, in my experience running, my own business, it's really, really important to keep your eye on that prize. And like, luckily, because of my background in journalism, I'm a really quick learner. And so I learn things that I'm not supposed to learn, right? Like I'm watching what everybody is doing. I pay attention to what our CRO does. I pay attention to what our CEO does. I pay attention to more than just my world and my expertise, and I learn from everybody.
Very interesting. I think you mentioned about mentorship in total. I've seen a few LinkedIn posts where people kind of consider you a great mentor in that case, right? And I think you've been very actively involved in training and guiding people through their career paths as well, right?
Yes.
I'd love to get a sense about how does a company which is trying to build up a content engine kind of ramps their teams up? Because the bigger problem is just not hiring the right team, but also getting the team at pace with what the company wants to do. What have your learnings been when it comes to kind of upskilling or maybe mentoring the content marketing teams, particularly larger organizations?
Yeah. So I think great mentorship also comes from great hiring. Like, I'm going to be a great mentor to a specific type of person. We need to really understand each other and understand what we can give to one another. And so I always try to build my teams around who I can actually help and who I can help and also who can help the business. And so because of that, if you look at any masthead on any major publication in America, chances are someone there was my intern. I teach people everything that I know, and I try to give so that way I can receive, frankly, because I'm somebody who I don't like to repeat. I don't like to solve a problem twice. Once I solve something, once I figure something out, I'm going to teach someone else how to do it, and I'm going to go on to the next problem because I'm just not going to enjoy doing the same thing over and over again.
Interesting. Uh, Again, interestingly, I want to kind of focus on the beast in the room. You guys, again, are an AI platform that you call yourselves. Um, I can tell you an instance. I was telling you just before we started the recording. I was in the Bay Area last time. I see an AI conversation happening almost on one of the cafe tables in every cafe over there. In New York, it was just a stark cultural difference for me, and I was very happy because of it because I like, hey, no more AI only in my life. I mean, that's great. For someone who's working in a technology company on the East Coast where there's not a lot of technology bits that are coming in. I mean, I'm not saying New York doesn't have tech startups, but what I'm trying to say is it's not the general culture of the city, basically, right? It's more art, it's more culture. It's a separate kind of things that are there over here. And your company being based out of San Francisco right now.
Yeah.
I want to first understand the cultural difference that in AI that you see when it comes to even learning from like being fascinated about the category in general.
Yeah.
And if you can focus on, you can choose not to answer this also. But I just feel a lot of marketers don't still understand AI, but they're not ready to accept it in this case. So, what are your thoughts on this? And I might be wrong completely, but I just start to kind of speak.
Well, I've changed my mind about AI, frankly. A year ago, I would have told you that, it's not going to be important in content production. The content that it produces is, not high quality enough, doesn't meet my expertise. But frankly, I was using AI wrong. I don't think AI is for content generation. I think it's for content augmentation. And we need to really think about, what can it do to make lives easier for content marketers? I don't know if we need to write landing pages anymore. Landing pages have a very formulaic construction. And
Right.
like when there's a formula like that, why not use an algorithm to, augment the information that you're trying to like accomplish? But I have not seen content marketing really embrace AI. I was at a conference last week, and my goal was to find more creative ways to use AI in my day-to-day job. And I asked every single person that I met, how are you using AI? What are you using AI for? And I didn't get any answers. Like no one was using AI,
Yeah.
or no one was admitting they were using AI. And so I am like, this is that moment of transformation, just like in journalism when, digital cameras became available and it changed photography forever. Like this is going to transform our industry, and like we have to figure out how to work with it. Otherwise we'll be replaced, and it'll be like, the newspaper reporter that doesn't know how to take a photo.
I mean, you mentioned a very good thing. I usually keep on saying this, that AI is not going to replace humans. AI is going to replace humans who don't know how to use AI.
Yeah.
I mean, very simply put up, I articulated that way what you meant, but how are you using AI as well right now? When you say content augmentation, there are different use cases you might have figured out.
Yeah.
So how are you kind of using it right now when you're working with a lot of these subject matter experts, writers? And it's just my experience, we create more than 100,000 pieces of content every year. We've realized when it comes to subject matter experts, most of them still hate AI. So they won't choose to kind of work on it, even if it solves a lot of problem for them, unless they're like super aware about it. But how are you dealing with it? I mean, love to get a
Yeah.
sense around what do companies like Sigma and Asana and all these companies think of AI?
So probably our most successful use case is transforming interviews with subject matter experts into first person narratives. And so, you would think, this is somebody who's an expert in data analytics, for example. They're storied in their career. They have all these ideas and insights, but they don't want to put pen to paper. They're not writers. And so when you have someone who is an experienced interviewer, talk to them and can pull those insights out of them, and you can get that recorded, it's much easier to transform those insights and that sort of transcript into a first person narrative. However, the most important thing is that it needs to be an experienced interviewer, somebody who can create narrative from a conversation. If you don't know what the beginning, middle, and end of the story you're trying to tell is, it's just going to be a rambling conversation that has no center point to the plot. And so that's how I also use my journalism skills for content creation and using it with AI, because you get me in a room with someone for 20 minutes, I'm going to find out their life story, just like you. And I'm going to be able to turn that into sparkling copy in a matter of minutes.
Interesting. Any thoughts you want to also share about the content repurposing part? Because we mentioned about AI, we mentioned about content augmentation. A big part with what B2B companies mostly struggle with is repurposing the same content that they've created from multiple channels.
Yeah.
See, creating that first piece of content is very difficult. Repurposing much easier. It's just that most people don't do it because it's like timely effort that needs to be done out. Just repurposing kind of boosts up almost like 3x 4x toward the outcome and distribution of that content piece that was made. Like for example, rapidly, if I were actually making a blog, if I just produce that blog in the form of a video, I make a couple of LinkedIn posts for it. I make maybe say an ebook converted into 4 other blogs for every industry use case, and then just distribute it all really well. The impact kind of multiplies after a point in time, basically, because the same asset being distributed multiple channels. With AI, I think repurposing has also become much more easier and possible. I don't know if you guys still use it over there, but I'd love to get a sense around how does the importance of repurposing look for in your life, because I just feel for B2B companies that's important.
Yeah, I'm not so gung ho about repurposing content. It's sort of like whenever someone asks me this question, it's like, well, is it easier to turn a hamburger into a burrito, or is it easier to just make a burrito from scratch?
Right.
And so sometimes it can work, but generally speaking, like content that is great for one channel is not necessarily going to be great for other channels. And it's sort of like you're going to need the expertise of the content marketer anyway to know what is relevant for each channel and like what's going to perform on each channel. AI is not going to give you 5 great blog posts from an ebook because it doesn't actually know what part of the ebook is any good. And it also doesn't know what are the audience metrics and interests of your blog, right? And so like it needs that human intervention to understand like, oh, this one section of the ebook is an amazing blog post. Someone needs to do that sort of intellectual labor to understand what is valuable for multiple platforms of expression.
I also have an interesting questions over there, right? I mean, one question that I always have in my mind is, so we have always had a lot of marketers, especially from larger companies, ask us, hey, we want to do content marketing, but the company doesn't have enough content conviction about, hey, I mean, do we kind of have the patience for the slow burn of content? See, content effectively compounds unlike paid marketing, which is say the tap is off, paid marketing is gone that day, right? Content has a longer longevity when it comes. So for every lead that you're getting from content marketing, your CAC is reducing over a period of time because you've spent the same amount of money and you kind of get compounding effects over a period of time. I'd love to understand, you've been in companies very interestingly where culturally the content conviction is high. I mean, publishers, I don't need kind of mention over there, but both with Asana and Sigma and all of these companies, the conviction of saying, hey, let's do content marketing is high. I mean, you don't have to double check and prove the fact content marketing is very important,
Yeah.
You don't have to get into that zone right now in either of these companies, right? How do you think would people like these kind of deal with their management and bosses to kind of build that conviction for?
I don't think you can. Actually, I think
That's interesting. You want to go
I do
deeper?
not think you can. I don't think you can convince anybody that content is valuable. They need to believe it and they need to know it in their bones, and they need to give you that like freedom to explore it and execute, because content is a long game and there's no one that thinks, oh, if I invest $100,000 this quarter, I will get it in 3 quarters from now, 4 quarters from now. No one wants to do investments, especially in B2B SaaS, that have that long tail return. And so you need advocates that will support you and champion you and choose your job based on who's going to actually do that, because you will not change hearts and minds about content in the short term.
Interesting. I think that's the most straightforward answer that I've got for it, but thanks for that. I mean, because a lot of people have that thing in their mind on what do we do in this case. The general conversations have been around, hey, you got to measure the content, you want to project an ROI, but I've never seen that succeed. So
Well,
if it's not
because
in your
there's
mind,
also the issue where like you need to have resourcing from other parts of the business to even be able to successfully measure the content impact. Like
Right.
if you need to bother your data team like for 5 months to build you a dashboard, you're never going to have the metrics that support that your content program is working. And they're never going to invest in content marketing and build those dashboards because it doesn't have a known ROI. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so pick the people who believe that content is a valuable product and a valuable, like, why would you work somewhere that doesn't value content as a content marketer? That's like being a clarinet player in a rock band. Like, it's just not going to work.
No, thanks for that. I think this is helpful. Great. I think so. We've gone 3 notches. We've gone knowing Emily as a person, Emily as a professional, maybe then Emily as what do you call as an AI champion. And the fourth part, I was asking you about your hobbies. We've had people call themselves from bathroom singers to car drivers to rock band artists across. You called yourself a cultural carnivore, if I were to put it that way. So that's interesting. We'd love to know Emily as a cultural carnivore. The last round is something I own. We're gonna ask you like a few rapid fire questions, 6 seconds to answer whatever's on the top of your mind. Just shoot them out.
Okay.
So we're gonna just start with that. Yeah, Emily. I mean, humble brag. What's your humble brag?
My humble brag?
So, okay, you can think about it and you
Okay.
can then answer. You know what a humble brag is, though?
Yeah. I just like, I'm a woman, so we don't brag.
Okay. Okay, let me ask you the easier ones first.
Okay.
Let me ask you top 3 tabs that are always open on your laptop, except for the Google tabs.
I practice inbox 0 and tab 0. I do not multitask.
Oh, so you don't?
No, I do not multitask. I use time blocking. So when I have a task of any kind, I will block out everything else and I will give myself the correct amount of time to accomplish that task. And that's how I get shit done.
Were you like the topper in your classes when you grew up?
Yes.
You were, right? I mean, all my topper friends do that. So yeah, because I think everyone I've had on this show till now, they're like, yeah, we have this problem of multitasking across with all tabs.
I don't believe in it.
Super. Comfort food.
Macaroni and cheese
That is quick.
from a box.
From a box. That's
From a box.
important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Favorite road trip destination?
I took a Greyhound bus across the country when I was in college with my sister, and so I would say that is my least favorite road trip. Going from New York to Seattle on a Greyhound bus took 4 days, and that was really difficult. So I would say I'm generally not a fan of road trips.
In your entire journalism career, the most interesting story that you've covered that has stayed with you for the rest of your lives?
I broke a story about a male model fight club in a abandoned Chinatown mall, and
In New York?
in New York City. It was over 10 years ago now, but it went on to be a cultural phenomena, that story.
Does that exist still?
I don't think it still exists. No, I mean, I kind of ruined it by writing
by
about
writing
it.
about it.
But it actually ended up being the subject of an episode of Weeds. So
Whoa.
I feel like
that should have been your humble brag. Okay,
Oh, okay, that's my humble brag. That's my humble brag. Yeah, I made it. I made it to Showtime.
Podcast? Do you listen to podcasts?
I'm a big fan of the Pod Saves America, Pod Saves the World, the Crooked Media
Interesting.
podcast.
Especially during the election seasons now.
Yeah.
They're all buzzing around.
Yeah,
right?
this is actually the first presidential election. I haven't been a journalist, so I'm experiencing
Damn.
media for the first time as a citizen. And it's really interesting to be on the receiving end and to not be chasing politicians down hallways.
Are you like a critical analyzer after that, saying, hey, you might be doing this wrong or you are doing this great?
Yes, I'm very annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Quick last two things, right? I want to ask you one favorite genre of music.
Electro synth pop.
I don't know what that means.
It's really pleasant music.
Pleasant music.
yeah.
That's why I'm not taking
Yeah,
that, of course.
it's fun. It's vibey.
It's fine.
yeah.
If not for a journalist, writer, or a content marketer, what you be in life?
CEO.
A CEO? You
Yeah.
always want to start something of your own, right? That entrepreneurial bug.
Yeah, eventually I will be.
Eventually, really. Super. Last thing I want to ask you: which brand's marketing do you like the most when you look at the billboards across the city?
Billboards across the city.
You've grown up in New York. You've seen so many billboards.
I've seen so many billboards. I think Airbnb actually has really great brand marketing. I think it's really clever. And immediately what is an Airbnb advertisement. And I always feel inspired by them and anything is possible. And so I think that's a really cool brand message.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Emily, for this. We are almost towards the end of it. Thanks for making this. I hope you had fun chatting in. Thank you so much for coming to the studio and being with us over here. That's been the time, guys, for today. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you.